Bandung 2 presents the After Dark Debates.
Critical discussions on contemporary issues.
When we was initially discussing this, I think one of the topics we wanted to look at was the use and abuse of classical Islam, because it seems, along with the buzzwords of tradition, that these are the topics now that are being told that we need to go back to a particular period of Islamic history that will eradicate the so-called radicalization of the Muslim youth today. And I find it very interesting that everybody's talking about classical without what does it really mean? What is the connotations behind classical? Now, we can look in any dictionary, a child's dictionary, we can go online, we can go to dictionary.com. If we look at their understanding of classical, it means Greek and Roman ancient civilization. It means that is the benchmark. In other words, we'd say it's the furqan, the criteria by which you judge everything else. So if we're talking about classical, do we as Muslims want to emulate ancient Greece and Rome? Of course not. But it's also interesting when you look at the historical Orientalist perspective on what they class as the golden age of Islam. It basically extends from the 8th to the 13th century. Now, if you look at the website in Wikipedia, they say, for example, that the golden period was between the 8th and the 13th century. Now, this is also the time when we find that the Islamic culture was brought into or was infused with a lot of Greek and Roman philosophy. So common sense tells me as a Muslim the classical period of Islam covers the eras of the revelation, and you could say the Khulafa Rashidin. So in essence, are we talking about a classical Islam, an Islam that is dominated and suits in with the standards of European hegemony? And will Islam become the latest tool of Western hegemony or white supremacy? Because I think these are the questions we have to ask when we talk about classical Islam.
I think Brother Abdullah has raised a really important point here, and it's interesting because that kind of argument would often be received as, if you like, reactionary, Salafist, Wahhabist in nature. In fact, there seems to be a kind of movement towards understanding that particular take on the whole classical Islam issue as essentially, if you like, anti-classical, in the sense of denying the classical tradition, trying to distance oneself from it. Classic case being, to use a pun if you like, the original Salafiyya movement associated with Muhammad Abdul's school, the Al-Manar school, followed by Rashid Rida, and anticipated by Jamaluddin Afghani. Very different to the Saudi Salafi Wahhabi school, which is a kind of later experience. And essentially, that school, the Abdul school if you like, was arguing that the roots of Muslim decline lay in essentially the influx and influence of alien ideologies on Islamic thought, in particular the kind of Hellenistic tradition, which you seem to be pointing to in the points you just made previously. So it's very interesting that you've raised this criticism, because now I want to, as it were, throw the down the gauntlet and say, well, what's your take on the Afghani Abdul Rashid Rida strand? Because, you know, if you want to look at this dialectically or dichotomously, you could say you've got the proponents of traditional classical Islam, and then you've got those critiquing that, saying, well, this is where the decline actually set in. I mean, albeit they wouldn't use the kind of language you're using about Aryanization, Hellenization, Western hegemony or white supremacy, but they would certainly argue that this is where the roots of the decline lay, and they point back to a golden era. That's the language used, which, although Western Orientalists identify the golden era of Islam being the classical period, the Salafists say no, the golden era was Medina. The golden era was the prophetic period in the Rashidun Caliphate. So I just like your thoughts on that, and then maybe some
I mean,
contributions?
for me personally, at the end of the day, the Quran will always be the Furqan by which you judge everything else. And speaking from someone who comes from a non-Islamic background, coming from the West Indies, I believe I am a person who infuses the best of West Indian culture into Islam. So it's not a case of I'm against infusing outside cultures, but rather we must use the Quran to say, okay, this fits in with Islam, this does not. And I think that can come from any particular time period in history. What I am worried with is the people who are purporting to be the modern carriers of classical Islamic knowledge, seeing themselves consciously or subconsciously to be adhering to Western hegemony by watering down or changing Islam itself. So rather than the Quran being the Furqan to judge everything else, the classical period of Islam that included infusion of Greek philosophy, Indian philosophy, that was not always compatible to Islam, now becomes the criteria. And that is what I essentially have a problem with. That's what I have a problem with. And we have to be careful of what we mean classical Islam. Because even this idea of classical, who came up with this idea of classical? You'll probably find it with some European professor sitting in a dusty library somewhere that saw we as Europeans need to define our classical period. Well, number one, as Muslims, we got to stop using European terminologies and have to go back to an Islamic terminology to define what do we see. And I think a lot of these groups themselves that are calling for the classical period have unwittingly fell into the white supremacy mind mold.